Tonight, we gather to examine what may well be the most monumental milestone in the history of Chinese space exploration. On July 10, 2026, Beijing stunned the world by announcing the flawless recovery of an orbital booster rocket just minutes after liftoff, achieving this engineering miracle on their very first attempt. Now, if you are a bit skeptical, leaning on SpaceX's undisputed dominance, let us take a brief walk down memory lane. Cast your mind back to 2011, when Elon Musk publicly laughed at a little-known electric car rival called BYD. Fast forward to the global sales charts of 2025, while Tesla delivered a formidable 1.8 million vehicles. BYD completely rewrote the ledger by surging to an astonishing 5.4 million vehicles sold worldwide. The lesson is clear: never underestimate Chinese determination. Stay with us, and by the end of tonight, you will understand exactly why China absolutely had to succeed in this project, and the profound value this milestone holds for their space program. Before we dive in, if you share our passion for drifting through the cosmos, please take a moment to like this video or subscribe. It's a small gesture, but it goes a long way in helping this channel connect with more inquisitive souls like yourself. Now, let the journey unfold. For over 60 years, a fundamental, unyielding rule governed our relationship with the cosmos to reach the eternal peace of the stars. We had to build an empire of steel, sophisticated electronics, and roaring fire, only to throw it all away into the dark, crushing embrace of the Atlantic Ocean after just a single brief flight. Imagine purchasing a pristine, technologically flawless ocean liner, sailing it across the Atlantic just one time, and deliberately sinking it to the deep seabed the very moment the passengers step safely onto the shore. To our modern sensibilities, it sounds like absolute madness, an unfathomable extravagance that no business or nation could sustain indefinitely. Yet, for decades, this was the accepted price of admission to the high frontier. It was the only way we knew how to touch the sky. Why did the brilliant minds of the mid-20th century accept this magnificent waste as an ordinary cost of exploration? The answer does not lie in a lack of imagination, but rather in the uncompromising heavy physics of our home planet. Earth is a beautiful, nurturing mother, but she holds on to her children with an iron grip of gravity. To break free from her maternal embrace and enter the weightless realm, a vehicle must achieve what scientists call escape velocity, in simple, everyday terms. This is the absolute minimum speed a spacecraft must attain to overcome a planet's powerful gravitational pull, allowing it to coast into the eternal silence of deep space without ever falling back down to the ground. To reach this dizzying speed of nearly 25,000 miles per hour, a rocket cannot merely cruise or glide, it must unleash a violent, perfectly controlled, sustained explosion that defies belief. This extreme requirement introduces the cruelest paradox in all of aerospace engineering, a hurdle that shaped every blueprint of the 20th century. The heavier a rocket is, the more thrust its engines must produce to lift it off the launch pad. But to generate more thrust, you must add more fuel, and fuel, by its very nature, possesses a tremendous amount of weight. Thus, you are forced to add even more fuel just to carry the dead weight of the fuel you just added a moment before. This vicious, compounding cycle is dictated by an immutable law of nature, known to physicists as the Tsiolkovsky rocket equation. This is a profound mathematical formula that reveals a harsh, unavoidable truth. The final speed of any spacecraft depends exponentially on the ratio of its initial mass, which includes all that heavy propellant, to its final mass when the engines finally fall silent and the fuel is completely spent. When you look back at old photographs of a towering rocket standing majestically against a blue sky, 90% of what you are looking at is not the payload, nor the brave astronauts, nor the delicate scientific instruments. It is purely liquid fuel. The actual useful machine, the capsule or the satellite, is nothing more than a tiny, fragile seed sitting precariously atop a massive mountain of combustible energy, because every single ounce of extra weight threatens the success of the entire voyage. The master engineers of the past had to make a ruthless, heartbreaking choice. They could not afford to equip the rocket with heavy landing gear, robust heat shields, or extra fuel reserves to bring it back home safely. The structural mathematics of the universe simply would not allow it to give the payload its precious ticket to orbit. The massive booster stages had to be completely stripped of any excess weight, burnt to a hollow, empty shell within 2 or 3 short minutes, and cast aside like used matches into the void. This engineering reality birthed the era of the disposable rocket, an epic of magnificent human genius tethered to a tragic, unsustainable economic model. The world's greatest nations poured the collective intellect of their finest minds and billions of dollars of their citizens' hard-earned wealth into these gleaming silver arrows. We watched them ascend in blinding glory, filling our hearts with pride, but we rarely spoke of where they landed. The first stages, marvels of human craftsmanship containing thousands of intricate valves, miles of precise wiring, and massive turbo pumps machined to tolerances thinner than a human hair, would tumble blindly back through the atmosphere. They would tear apart under the immense aerodynamic stress of the fall, or smash into the unforgiving ocean waves at thousands of miles per hour, sinking forever into the silent, sunless depths of the sea. This was the great waste of old space, a period of history where we treated our most advanced, expensive, and beautiful transportation systems as single-use, throwaway items. We accepted this cycle of creation and destruction because we genuinely believed the laws of physics left us no other choice. We assumed that the gravity well of our planet was a barrier so steep that the price of crossing it would always demand the total sacrifice of the vessel that carried us there. For generations, this economic barrier kept the heavens exclusive, a grand, elite game reserved only for the wealthiest of superpowers, leaving the rest of the world to watch from the ground, waiting for a day when the iron laws of gravity might finally be answered with a new kind of human ingenuity. Yet, history has a way of rewarding those who refuse to accept the impossible as final. As the turn of the new millennium approached, a quiet, stubborn shift began to stir within the industry. It started with a venture that many seasoned veterans dismissed as nothing more than a grandiose folly. When Elon Musk founded his company in the early 2000s, his vision was not merely to launch satellites, but to fundamentally alter the math of our existence among the stars. He proposed a goal that bordered on the heretical to reduce the cost of spaceflight by a factor of 100, and to do so by achieving the one thing every textbook said was a fool's errand: reusing the very machine that carried the payload into the abyss. The initial years were defined not by triumph, but by the stinging reality of repeated failure. We watched from afar as their early experimental rockets faltered, burned, and shattered upon the launch pad. For those of us who grew up respecting the perfection of the Saturn era, it was painful to witness. The industry establishment looked on with a mixture of pity and condescension. They scoffed at the circus acts performed on television, labeling the attempts to return the booster to Earth as mere publicity stunts. They argued, with the confidence of decades of experience, that the laws of nature simply would not permit a fragile shell of aluminum and titanium to survive the chaotic descent through our thick atmosphere, only to reignite its engines and settle softly back onto a moving target in the middle of a restless ocean. But then, everything changed on a quiet December evening in 2015. The world stood still as that familiar, slender white silhouette, the Falcon 9, ascended into the velvet darkness of the night sky, carrying its precious cargo of satellites toward the stars. This was not the end of the mission, but rather the beginning of a transformation. As the primary engines fell silent and the vehicle reached the edge of space, the booster did something that defied everything we had learned. It did not tumble into the sea to be lost to the depths forever. Instead, it performed a graceful, precise, and calculated ballet. It utilized its cold gas thrusters to pivot in the vacuum, executing a delicate reversal of direction that seemed to borrow more from science fiction than from the cold and hard reality of orbital mechanics. Then came the return. The rocket activated its engines once more, deploying what we call retropropulsion, a powerful controlled burst of flame that acted as a phantom hand, reaching out to catch the vehicle and slow its descent, from the hypersonic speeds of a falling meteor to a gentle hover. It was a masterpiece of control, facilitated by the sophisticated mastery of the gas generator cycle. In this fundamental combustion process, the turbine blades spin at a dizzying pace to power the high-pressure pumps, forcing a precise mixture of fuel and oxidizer into the combustion chamber to create that steady, roaring pillar of fire. It was this same technology, guided by modern, lightning-fast, digital brainpower, that allowed the booster to ignore the buffeting winds and the shifting waves beneath it. When that booster finally settled with a resounding thud onto the landing pad at Cape Canaveral, a collective shiver ran through those of us who understood the history of the frontier. It was the sound of a paradigm shifting. For the first time in human history, we had sent a machine to the edge of the sky and brought it back home intact. The condescension that had once surrounded the project evaporated, replaced by a sudden, frantic scramble from the established giants to understand how the impossible had been rendered mundane. It was a moment that reminded us of our own youth, when we believed that there was no summit too high, no ocean too wide, and no challenge too steep if one possessed the courage to stare directly into the void of the unknown and refuse to blink. This accomplishment was not merely about a landing, it was a fundamental victory over the tyranny of the rocket equation we spoke of earlier. By successfully returning the vehicle, the company had proven that the structural dead weight was no longer a total loss. They had demonstrated that the most expensive component of the system could be reclaimed, refurbished, and flown again and again. It was a lesson in humility for the aerospace world, a reminder that innovation often waits for those who are willing to be called fools for a little while. This feat laid the groundwork for an era of consistent, reliable access to orbit, changing the rhythm of space exploration from a rare, monumental occasion into a frequent, almost routine heartbeat. It was a triumph of persistence. And for those of us watching from our armchairs, it offered a profound, silent comfort. The frontier was not closed. It was simply waiting for a new generation of dreamers to find a better way to reach it. In the years that followed that historic landing, a quiet, almost unsettling silence settled over the global aerospace industry. A stillness that many of us observed with a mixture of wonder and deep contemplation. The brilliant, competitive mosaic of space exploration that we had known throughout our youth, a landscape defined by the proud, historic rivalries of great nations, began to slowly dissolve into a single, towering monopoly. It was an era where the old guard looked on in fascination and rising anxiety as a single, private company systematically absorbed the commercial launch market of the entire planet. Week after week, month after month, the thunderous roar of the Falcon 9 became the default soundtrack of humanity's ascent to the stars, turning what once felt like a grand adventure into a routine corporate operation. What had begun as a refreshing wave of private innovation slowly matured into something far more complex. A staggering concentration of orbital power that the world had never witnessed before. For those of us who spent decades watching the steady, dependable workhorses of the traditional space powers, this sudden, sweeping shift was truly breathtaking. The venerable Russian Soyuz vessels, which had served as the reliable, rugged cosmic ferry for generations, found themselves largely sidelined, stripped of their historic commercial dominance and geopolitical leverage. Across the Atlantic, the pride of Europe, the magnificent Ariane rocket program suffered deep, painful structural delays, leaving an entire continent without an independent ticket to the cosmos for years. There was a profound, deeply ironic moment in recent history when European nations, the very architects of modern industrial excellence, had to humbly purchase launch services from their private American competitor just to place their own classified defense satellites into the heavens. The delicate old equilibrium of global spaceflight was entirely shattered, leaving the rest of the world caught in a dependent, highly vulnerable position. This absolute dominance was concentrated in a highly specific region of the cosmos, a place that has now become the most fiercely contested real estate in human history. This is what scientists refer to as low Earth orbit, or simply LEO. To put it in plain, everyday terms, LEO is the silent, close-range cosmic highway wrapping directly around our planet, a delicate, low-altitude arena stretching just a few hundred miles above our atmosphere, where satellites can glide smoothly in a near vacuum, completing a full journey around the entire globe in a mere 90 minutes. It is the vital, primary frontier for modern global internet, weather tracking, and advanced military intelligence gathering. By launching thousands upon thousands of mass-produced satellites into this specific celestial highway, a single commercial enterprise had effectively claimed a near-absolute monopoly on the primary corridor connecting our ground infrastructure to the wider universe. As the global community looked up into the evening sky from their backyards, watching these long, glittering trains of artificial stars cross the darkness in perfect formation, a collective realization began to dawn upon the leaders of great nations. They recognized that humanity had inadvertently created a profound vulnerability within its celestial infrastructure, what engineers call a single point of failure. In simple, practical language, this is a localized bottleneck within a grand system, a solitary pillar of support so incredibly vital that if it encounters a hidden structural flaw, a technical glitch, or a sudden management crisis, the entire global network instantly collapses into paralyzed stillness. If a technical issue were to ground that single fleet of private American rockets, the entire Western world's access to space would freeze overnight, proving that relying on one provider was a dangerous gamble for the future of civilization. This was no longer a matter of pure economics or corporate success. It had transformed into a pressing question of national sovereignty and long-term survival. The geopolitical reality of our world, a reality we understand all too well from the long, tense decades of the 20th century, dictates that no global superpower can allow its strategic eyes and ears in the heavens to depend entirely on the goodwill or the financial stability of a single foreign private citizen. The dramatic use of satellite internet networks in recent regional conflicts proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that whoever controls the infrastructure of space holds the ultimate lever of influence over the military and political events unfolding on the ground. The quiet realization rippled through the halls of power. The sky was being quietly divided, and those who did not build their own independent ladders would be left behind in the dark. And so, the great powers of the world began to awaken from their collective, decade-long slumber. They realized that to preserve their independent voice on the global stage, they had to break this terrifying monopoly and match the frantic, industrial pace of the new commercial space age. This profound strategic awakening is what set the stage for the dramatic, unheralded event of July 2026. It was not merely a demonstration of technical capability by a rising Eastern power, but a direct, calculated response to the deep imbalance that had quieted the world for a generation. The realization that space must remain an open, balanced, and multipolar arena inspired a renewed wave of fierce, quiet determination across the globe, ensuring that the next chapter of our journey into the great night would not be written by a single corporate hand, but by a chorus of nations reclaiming their destiny among the stars. Picture yourself standing on a quiet, sandy beach on Hainan Island, feeling the warm, tropical breeze of a mid-July evening in the year 26. The air is thick with moisture, carrying the faint, salty scent of the South China Sea as it gently laps against the shore. In the distance, cutting through the velvet darkness of the night, brilliant white floodlights illuminate a magnificent monument to human ingenuity. There stands the Long March 10B, a towering cylinder of pristine metal, waiting silently on its maiden flight. For those of us who remember the quiet anticipation of Cape Canaveral decades ago, the atmosphere here carries that same familiar, intoxicating magic. It is a moment suspended in time, where the natural world holds its breath, and the only sound is the rhythmic, soothing whisper of the ocean waves. Inside the Launch Control Center, a sea of glowing monitors casts a soft blue light on the faces of engineers who have dedicated years of their lives to this solitary evening. The countdown ticks away in absolute stillness, a solemn progression toward the unknown. 10, 9, 8, each word spoken in the quiet command room feels heavy, resonating with the weight of history. When the clock finally touches the absolute point of departure. The moment we call T0, the silence of the night is shattered not by a sharp explosion, but by a deep, primal awakening. At T0, the precise second where the automated sequence commits the vessel to the sky, the primary valves snap open and a torrent of energy is unleashed. 7 powerful YF-100K engines ignite in perfect, synchronized harmony. This propulsion system utilizes a classic, dependable combination of super-chilled liquid oxygen and highly refined kerosene, transforming thousands of gallons of liquid into a brilliant, blinding sun on the edge of the coast. The light is so intense, it turns the midnight sky into a temporary, artificial dawn, casting long, dramatic shadows across the landscape. Then comes the sound. It begins as a low-frequency rumble, a vibration so incredibly deep that you do not merely hear it with your ears, you feel it deep within your chest cavity, a sympathetic resonance with the very fabric of the earth. It is a slow, majestic rise, as the 760 tons of metal conquer the invisible chains of gravity and begin their lonely journey upward. The rocket clears the tower with an elegant, almost stately slowness, riding a pillar of fire twice as long as the vehicle itself. As it gathers speed, it arcs gracefully over the dark expanse of the ocean, tracing a golden thread across the tapestry of the night sky. For the observer on the ground, the sound gradually softens from a deafening roar into a rhythmic, crackling thunder, like the tearing of giant sheets of canvas in the wind. The machine is now traveling faster than a speeding bullet, punching its way through the dense, protective blanket of air that shields our planet. As the vehicle accelerates into the upper reaches of the sky, it rapidly approaches the most treacherous and physically demanding threshold of its entire ascent. This is the moment aerospace engineers refer to as maximum aerodynamic pressure, known in the scientific community by the concise shorthand of Max Q. To understand this concept in a simple, down-to-earth way, imagine driving an automobile down an open highway and pushing your hand out of the window into the rushing wind. The faster you drive, the harder the air pushes back against your skin. For a rocket leaping into space, Max Q is the exact point in time when the crushing weight of the thick atmosphere outside slams against the speeding nose cone with the greatest possible structural force. It is as if a heavy but invisible hand is pressing down on the titanium skin of the spacecraft, trying to break its resolve. During this critical phase, the structural integrity of the Long March 10B is tested to its absolute limit. The titanium alloys and advanced composite materials must endure twisting forces and intense vibrations as the vehicle fights its way through the dense air layers. In the control room, the telemetry data flows in silence, a digital heartbeat tracking the immense stress placed upon the frame. And then, a quiet cheer ripples through the monitors. The rocket passes safely through the gauntlet of Max Q. The air outside begins to thin out rapidly. The invisible resistance fades away, and the structural burden on the vehicle drops to near zero. With the thickest part of the atmosphere now conquered, the glowing ember of the rocket climbs higher and higher into the rare, pristine vacuum of the upper sky. The thunderous roar that shook the beaches of Hainan has faded into a distant, gentle hum, almost entirely lost to the vast silence of the upper atmosphere. The first stage has fulfilled the primary half of its grand purpose, carrying its cargo above the clouds, preparing for the delicate cosmic dance that will soon unfold high above our world. At approximately 120 seconds after leaving the tropical shores of Hainan Island, the Long March 10B reaches a majestic, lonely altitude of nearly 70 kilometers above the dark waters of the Pacific. At this height, the dense, noisy atmosphere of our planet has faded into a thin, ghostly shroud. The furious, shaking roar that filled the coastline moments ago is suddenly replaced by a profound, breathtaking stillness. In the control room, the primary telemetry screens show the completion of the initial phase. The primary engines shut down simultaneously. This critical milestone is what aerospace scientists call main engine cutoff, or simply MECO. To put this into everyday terms, MECO is the precise moment when the primary booster engines intentionally go dark, instantly transforming the rocket from a screaming pillar of fire into a silent, weightless vessel gliding gracefully through the upper twilight. A fraction of a second later, a series of pneumatic latches release with a muffled thud that vibrates through the metallic frame. The upper stage ignites its single methane engine, pushing forward like a brilliant star to carry its satellite payload into a permanent home among the constellations. The massive first stage booster, now completely hollowed of its heavy fuel, is left entirely alone in the quiet dark. Yet, it does not immediately fall, carried by the tremendous momentum of its initial push. The booster continues to coast upward, climbing silently toward its apogee. In the beautiful language of orbital mechanics, the apogee is the absolute highest point of a ballistic path, the brief, magical moment of pause where an object hangs suspended at the very peak of its journey before the invisible, patient hand of Earth's gravity begins to gently drag it back down toward the ground. For the Long March 10B, on this historic July evening, this cosmic peak occurs at an altitude of roughly 100 kilometers, right at the doorstep of the infinite. It is here that the booster crosses the legendary Kármán line. For those of us who have spent our lives looking up at the stars, the Kármán line holds a sacred meaning. It is the invisible, internationally accepted border separating our fragile, blue atmosphere from the endless, absolute black void of outer space. Out here, there is no weather, no wind, and no sound. The sky is no longer blue, but a deep, velvet black, studded with thousands of steady, unblinking stars that have watched over our species since the dawn of time. It is within this weightless, silent theater that the booster must perform its most delicate and invisible dance. The rocket is coasting upward tail first, but to prepare for its long journey home, it must turn itself completely around a precise rotation of a full 180 degrees. However, because there is no air in the vacuum of space, traditional airplane wings, flaps, or aerodynamic rudders are completely useless. There is nothing to push against to solve this dilemma. The onboard computer activates a specialized system known as cold gas thrusters. To understand these devices simply, imagine them as tiny, non-combustive nozzles hidden along the upper rim of the rocket that release short, gentle bursts of highly pressurized nitrogen gas. They act like delicate, phantom fingers pushing against the void, smoothly nudging the massive multi-ton metal cylinder without creating a single spark of fire. From the perspective of an invisible observer floating in the void, the maneuver is a masterclass in mechanical serenity. The cold gas thrusters hiss silently in the vacuum, releasing faint, translucent plumes of gas that instantly freeze into tiny crystals, glittering like diamond dust in the distant sunlight. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the giant white cylinder begins to pivot. The dark, heat-shielded business end of the rocket swings gracefully around to face the planet below, while the elegant nose points upward toward the stars. This is the invisible flipping dance, a maneuver executed with such digital precision that it looks less like a triumph of brutal engineering and more like a gentle, slow-motion ballet performed in the grandest theater of the universe. As the turn completes, the booster hangs upside down for a fleeting second at the apogee, framed against the magnificent curve of the Earth. Below, the blue ocean, the swirling white patterns of tropical clouds, and the thin, glowing line of the atmosphere look fragile and incredibly beautiful. The machine has conquered the first half of its impossible journey, using the quiet laws of physics to reposition itself in the dark. It is now perfectly aligned, nose up and tail down, ready to begin its long, perilous fall back into the waiting arms of the atmosphere. Guided only by the silent math of the cosmos and the unyielding dreams of the engineers waiting patiently on the surface of the world below. The journey home is a silent acceleration, a gravity-driven plummet that brings the hollowed shell of the Long March 10B back down from the border of the cosmos. As the booster re-enters the increasingly dense layers of the sky, the air outside begins to scream once more, pressing against the hot, metallic skin. Out in the vast, rolling waters of the ocean, a specialized recovery ship measuring 144 meters in length rises and falls with the gentle rhythm of the sea swells. On its open deck sits a strange, monumental structure, a massive web of interlaced cables and high-strength nets suspended by towering steel arms. The clock counting down in the control room ticks steadily toward the 360th second, the final moment of truth, where a 20-story column of aerospace machinery must meet a floating cradle in the middle of the wild, dark water. At just a few thousand feet above the ocean surface, the central engine ignites with a sudden, deafening crackle. The single pillar of fire flares against the dark water, creating a massive cushion of steam and spray. The rocket is no longer dropping. It is hovering, descending at a slow, stately pace of just a few meters per second. For those used to the classic profile of the Falcon 9, the sight is profoundly disorienting. There are no landing legs unfolding from the base, no wide carbon fiber struts reaching out to touch the floor. There is only a smooth, unbroken metallic cylinder balancing precariously on a needle of fire, lowering itself directly into the open mouth of the steel netting structure. It is a spectacle that defies the intuition of anyone who has spent a lifetime watching traditional machinery, looking less like a standard landing and more like an impossible act of thread the needle on a cosmic scale. Then, the final second arrives. The booster slips smoothly into the cradle of the suspended web. The heavy metal chocks and hooks protruding from the sides of the rocket's frame make contact with the braided cables, and the engine instantly goes dark. In that fleeting moment of physical connection, the entire system must handle a massive spike in kinetic stress, known to structural physicists as the impact impulse. In plain, everyday language, the impact impulse is the sudden, peak shock wave of brute force generated at the exact millisecond of physical contact between two massive objects, much like the stinging vibration that rattles through a catcher's wrist when a fast baseball slams hard into the leather pocket of a mitt. If this sudden surge of energy is not managed properly, it can shatter the delicate internal plumbing of the engines, or buckle the thin metal walls of the fuel tanks. To neutralize this destructive wave, the recovery ship's netting system utilizes a brilliant array of heavy-duty hydraulic dampers and advanced magnetic brakes. As the hooks of the rockets settle into the net, the cables gently give way, unwinding just a few feet under immense computerized resistance. This calculated movement smoothly absorbs and dissipates the residual momentum of the fall, converting the violent energy of a descending rocket into a gentle, harmless compression. The net wraps around the midsection of the booster like a protective glove, locking it into place and neutralizing the rhythmic rolling motion of the ocean waves below. In the control room back on dry land, the telemetry streams freeze into a state of perfect stability. The great machine is caught. It stands perfectly upright, suspended securely in its cradle of steel and rope, swaying gently with the slow, deep heartbeat of the sea. The 360th second has passed, and with it, a new frontier in human transportation has been quietly crossed. In the unforgiving realm of rocket science, achieving a flawless recovery on the very first attempt is traditionally considered an absolute impossibility. The laws of fluid dynamics and extreme thermodynamics offer no margin for error. There is no safety net or trial run when a 20-story tower of metal is plummeting toward the Earth at supersonic speeds. To appreciate why a first-time success is so rare, we only have to look back at the dramatic, years-long saga of SpaceX. Their path to mastering the Falcon 9 was not a clean march of victories, but a brutal trail of spectacular public explosions. We watched with bated breath as booster after booster slammed hard into ocean drone ships running out of hydraulic fluid, losing thrust, or tipping over into blinding orange fireballs. SpaceX embraced a philosophy of learning through hard knocks, deliberately pushing their machinery to the breaking point to harvest data from the wreckage. It was a necessary, chaotic leap that proved just how difficult it is to tame a returning rocket. So, how did the developers of the Long March 10B defy this cosmic rule, skipping the traditional cycle of destruction to catch their booster perfectly on the very first try? The answer lies in a combination of tactical patience and modern computing. By studying a decade of SpaceX's highly public triumphs and errors, Chinese engineers bypassed a massive mountain of trial and error. They already possessed a proven blueprint of what was physically possible. Furthermore, by utilizing advanced 21st century supercomputer simulations that simply did not exist during the infancy of Western reusability programs, they could stress test their matrix control algorithms millions of times in virtual environments before a single sheet of metal was ever cut. Most brilliantly, they changed the rules of the game by removing the most volatile variable from the vehicle itself, by stripping the heavy, complex landing legs off the rocket and shifting the entire burden of shock absorption to an automated, computerized net on the recovery ship. They eliminated the exact mechanical failure points that caused so many early rockets to tip and explode. It was a masterpiece of methodical planning, proving that while the first step is always the hardest, a latecomer can slide flawlessly into the future if they carefully map the footprints left in the mud before them. As the quiet steam dissipates over the resting ocean, a profound question lingers in the cool midnight air. For over a decade, we have watched the Falcon 9 unfold its massive carbon fiber landing legs. Yet, this silent, legless embrace reveals a completely different engineering philosophy. To truly understand this triumph, let us now step beneath the metal skin and examine the fierce, quiet war of design principles. When we look back at the grand industrial projects of our lives, the roaring foundries, the magnificent bridges, the heavy locomotives that defined the landscape of our youth, we know that earthly engineering always allows for a generous margin of safety. If a beam needs to be stronger, we simply make it thicker. We add more steel, more concrete, more weight. But the moment a vehicle turns its face toward the stars, that comforting luxury vanishes entirely. The universe operates on a strict cosmic ledger, dictated by a fundamental principle known to physics as the law of conservation of mass. In plain, everyday terms, this law states that matter can neither be created nor destroyed, only transformed. In the unforgiving mathematics of rocket science, this means that every single ounce of physical material you choose to carry up into the sky must be accounted for with absolute, painful precision. Every gram of metal requires a price to be paid in fire and fuel. To the master architects of the cosmos, this unrefined weight is known as structural dry mass, in simple, down-to-earth language. This refers to the pure, cold weight of the completely empty rocket shell, the bare bones of the machine, consisting of the metal tanks, the complex wiring, the computer brains, and the cold engines once all the heavy liquid fuel has been completely drained away. Think of it like preparing for a long, arduous hiking trip into the deep wilderness. The structural dry mass is the weight of your heavy leather boots, the thick canvas of your backpack, and the metal frames of your gear before you add a single drop of drinking water or a single morsel of food. No matter how strong you are, your body must expend constant energy just to carry the dead weight of the backpack itself before you can even begin to carry the provisions that will keep you alive. This reality introduces what engineers refer to as the exponential structural penalty. To put this in plain, practical terms, this is the compounding, vicious cycle where adding just one single pound of extra metal to the top of a rocket forces you to add several more pounds of structural support to the bottom, which then requires dozens of additional pounds of heavy fuel to lift it, which in turn demands a larger, heavier tank to hold that extra fuel. For more than a decade, the magnificent Falcon 9 rocket has accepted this heavy penalty as the cost of its historic success to return safely from the edge of the void. The Falcon 9 must carry 4 massive, sophisticated landing legs made of advanced carbon fiber, complete with heavy hydraulic pistons and complex mechanical deployment systems. While these legs appear sleek and elegant on television, they represent thousands of pounds of dead weight that must be dragged all the way up to the edge of space and all the way back down. This is a constant, heavy tax on the rocket's performance, forcing the engines to burn precious fuel simply to transport the very tools needed for the landing at the end of the journey. Because of this unyielding penalty, every aerospace designer must wrestle with the limitations of the payload margin. In clear, everyday language, the payload margin is the precious, highly restricted weight capacity left over for the actual, useful cargo, the communications satellites, the weather instruments, or the human habitats after the rocket has accounted for its own heavy structure and the massive oceans of fuel required to break free from Earth's gravity. When a rocket is forced to carry heavy landing gear on its body, that payload margin shrinks dramatically. It is a harsh compromise that limits the efficiency of the entire system, meaning that fewer satellites can be carried on a single flight, and the cost of every single pound of cargo sent into orbit remains tethered to the weight of the landing apparatus itself. This is precisely where the design of the Long March 10B represents a profound, almost philosophical departure from the established path. The engineers in Beijing looked at the heavy carbon fiber legs of the Western establishment and asked a radical question: what if we could leave the landing gear behind on Earth by completely removing the traditional landing legs from the body of the rocket? The Long March 10B frees itself from the crushing chains of the structural dry mass penalty. The vehicle that leaps off the launch pad at Hainan is a masterpiece of absolute minimalism, a clean, smooth, unbroken metallic cylinder that carries no unnecessary weight into the sky. It features only the essential chocks and small titanium hooks built into its upper frame, structures that weigh only a tiny fraction of a traditional landing leg system. By shifting the heavy, complex, shock-absorbing mechanisms away from the vehicle and onto the suspended netting system of the floating ocean platform, the Long March 10B achieves a level of transport efficiency that was once thought impossible for a reusable vehicle. The rocket does not need to waste precious energy or carry larger tanks to transport heavy landing gear through the violent journey of ascent and descent. The heavy lifting is done entirely by the massive steel arms and computerized hydraulic dampers waiting patiently on the surface of the sea. This brilliant engineering choice allows the rocket to preserve its payload margin to an extraordinary degree, ensuring that nearly every ounce of lifting capability is dedicated entirely to carrying useful cargo into the quiet dark of orbit. When a massive mechanical giant falls from the velvet edge of space, it carries with it an immense, almost terrifying amount of momentum. The primary task of any recovery system is not merely to bring the vehicle to a total halt, but to safely transform that violent momentum into a state of harmless, peaceful rest. This brings us directly to the fascinating study of dampening mechanics, where two vastly different schools of human thought clash in a quiet war of design. On one side stands the established, time-tested approach of the Falcon 9, utilizing rigid hydraulic pistons and compressible metals to conquer the impact. On the other side rests the radical, though flexible philosophy of the Long March 10B, which surrenders its weight entirely to a floating net of steel and wire. Let us first visualize the familiar, majestic descent of the Falcon 9 as it nears its landing platform out on the rolling swells of the open sea. As the single Merlin engine creates a roaring cushion of bright flame, four massive legs sweep outward and downward from the base of the white cylinder, locking into place like the iron talons of a great mechanical bird. The exact moment of touchdown is an intense, highly concentrated event of pure physical force. To survive this sudden deceleration, the base of each landing leg is equipped with heavy hydraulic pistons and an incredibly clever internal component consisting of an aluminum honeycomb structure. The very moment the rocket contacts the solid steel deck of the drone ship, it brings with it an immense amount of what scientists call kinetic energy. In simple, everyday terms, kinetic energy is the raw, active energy that any physical object possesses purely due to the velocity of its motion. It is the invisible, heavy force that gives a speeding freight train its unstoppable momentum, or a classic V8 automobile its satisfying thrust down an open highway. To neutralize this kinetic energy, upon touchdown, The Falcon 9 literally crushes the internal aluminum honeycomb cores inside its landing struts, permanently deforming the soft metal to absorb the initial violent shockwave, much like the crumple zones engineered into the heavy American sedans of our youth. Simultaneously, the heavy hydraulic cylinders force high-pressure fluid through tiny, precise valves to slow down the stroke of the landing gear, smoothing out the remaining rebound. It is a brilliant and highly effective system, but it requires the rocket to balance its towering, top-heavy frame entirely on a flat, solid deck. If the ocean waves cause the drone ship to pitch and roll, or if a sudden, unpredictable gust of wind catches the long, metallic cylinder, this narrow base faces a severe danger of tipping over into the sea. The rocket must remain completely rigid, bearing its own massive weight upon its metallic knees, while a specialized robotic gripper crawls slowly out across the wet deck to lock it down. Now, turn your mind away from that rigid deck and contemplate the quiet alternative engineered for the Long March 10BA system that completely reimagines how a falling giant meets the sea as the legless white cylinder drops through the darkness toward its recovery ship. It does not look for a solid floor to stand upon. Instead, it aims for the yielding, suspended embrace of a giant mechanical web, because the Long March 10B is completely free from the heavy structural burden of landing struts. Its smooth outer skin behaves beautifully as it slices back through the atmosphere. The engineers specifically designed its smooth, legless frame to optimize what aerodynamicists call the drag coefficient. In plain, ordinary language, the drag coefficient is a precise mathematical value that measures exactly how smoothly a physical object rees or resists the thick layers of airflow passing around it as it moves. A very low value means the rocket glides like a sharp needle through the air, while a higher value means it catches the wind like an open umbrella. Using the natural thickness of the atmosphere to slow its descent without consuming a single drop of fuel. By shaping the body of the Long March 10B to maintain a perfectly stable and predictable drag coefficient, the onboard computers can calculate the descent path with unprecedented accuracy, ensuring the booster drops straight down into the recovery zone like a plumb bob. When the booster finally reaches the floating platform, it enters the giant web of woven cables suspended by towering steel cranes. The moment of contact is completely different from the harsh, metal-on-metal slam of a traditional touchdown. For those of us who remember watching naval aircraft carriers operate, this netting system functions very much like the arresting wires stretched across a flight deck to catch a speeding fighter jet, as the titanium chocks built into the rocket's upper body slip into the heavy netting. The kinetic energy of the fall is not forced downward into a rigid deck or compressed into a pair of stiff legs. Instead, that energy is distributed outward, flowing harmlessly across the entire expanse of the woven web. The recovery ship's heavy-duty hydraulic dampers and advanced magnetic brakes immediately respond to the tension, slowly and smoothly unspooling the support cables under immense computerized resistance. The net cradles the rocket, gently decelerating its massive weight over several feet of controlled, flexible travel, transforming what could have been a destructive crash into a slow, peaceful sigh of mechanical relief. This comparison reveals a profound contrast in engineering philosophy. The Falcon 9 forces the rocket to carry the entire burden of its own protection, demanding that the vehicle remain strong rigid, and heavy enough to stand on its own feet amidst the unstable currents of the ocean. The Long March 10B, however, shifts that entire structural burden to the Earth itself, allowing the floating platform to catch the vehicle like a gentle hammock, catching a piece of falling fruit. It is a design that trades the brutal strength of columns and pistons for the elegant, distributed tension of a woven web. Beneath the gleaming metallic hulls of the Falcon 9 and the Long March 10B lies a quiet, invisible world of molecular alchemy, a world where the laws of chemistry are harnessed to create the terrifying yet beautiful fury of rocket propulsion. For decades, the choice of what a rocket drinks to satisfy its immense thirst was a settled question, a tradition passed down from the early pioneers of the Cold War. But tonight, a new chemical revolution is quietly unfolding in the dark sky, pitting the time-tested, heavy density of highly refined kerosene against the pristine, futuristic efficiency of high-purity liquid methane. It is a battle fought not with gears or pistons, but with the very atoms of carbon and hydrogen, shifting the way humanity fuels its dreams of the cosmos. For generations, the undisputed king of the launch pad has been a highly specialized fuel known to aerospace chemists as rocket propellant number 1, or simply P1. This is the lifeblood that powers the 9 majestic Merlin engines of the Falcon 9. To understand RP1 in a familiar, comfortable way, think of it as the ultimate, ultra-pure evolution of the premium aviation fuel, or the high-octane gasoline we used to pour into the carburetors of the classic American muscle cars of our youth. It is a thick, amber-colored hydrocarbon liquid, refined to such an extraordinary degree that it possesses a tremendous amount of energy packed into every single gallon. Kerosene is stable, safe to handle at ordinary temperatures, and incredibly dense, providing that massive brute force thrust required to lift a towering monument of steel off the heavy ground and push it through the thick layers of the lower sky. Yet, for all its magnificent power, this traditional fuel carries a hidden, stubborn flaw that threatens the very heart of rocket reusability. When refined kerosene meets super-chilled liquid oxygen inside the white-hot inferno of a combustion chamber, it undergoes a complex, heavy chemical breakdown that triggers what materials scientists call the coking effect. In clear, ordinary language, the coking effect is the heavy, unavoidable accumulation of thick, black carbon soot and baked, tar-like residue that cakes itself onto the delicate internal plumbing, the intricate injector nozzles, and the swirling turbo pumps of a rocket engine after a single flight. Think of a beautifully crafted wood-burning fireplace after a long, cold winter season. No matter how clean the wood seemed to be, the inside of the stone chimney becomes lined with a stubborn layer of dark, crusty creosote. In a rocket engine, this black soot clogs the microscopic passages designed to cool the metal walls, meaning that before a Falcon 9 booster can ever lift off a second time, teams of meticulous technicians must spend days flushing the engines with specialized solvents, inspecting every valve with tiny cameras, and carefully scrubbing away the carbon ghost of the previous flight. It is precisely within this chemical bottleneck that the design of the Long March 10B introduces a profound, forward-looking leap. While its first stage still relies on the heavy raw power of kerosene to clear the launch pad, its advanced upper stage turns its face toward a completely different molecular companion high-purity liquid methane. Methane is the simplest hydrocarbon in existence, consisting of just one solitary carbon atom surrounded by 4 protective arms of hydrogen. Because of this beautifully minimalist atomic structure, when liquid methane burns with liquid oxygen, the chemical reaction is almost entirely perfect, breaking down into nothing more than pure water vapor and carbon dioxide. The result of this clean combustion is a total absence of the coking effect. When the methane-powered engines of the Long March 10B fall silent in the vacuum of orbit, the internal chambers remain as pristine, spotless, and bright as the day they were machined in the factory. There is no black soot to scrub, no tar-like residue to dissolve, and no clogged cooling lines to clear. This immaculate cleanliness transforms the entire economics of spaceflight, allowing the engine to be refueled and reignited almost immediately, much like a commercial airliner pulling up to a terminal gate to take on a fresh tank of fuel before its next routine journey across the ocean. Furthermore, the Chinese aerospace establishment achieved a brilliant stroke of fiscal efficiency by sourcing this high-purity methane directly from ordinary, civilian liquefied natural gas, the very same LNG utility networks that warm modern homes, transforming a common civilian resource into a cheap, abundant fuel for the high frontier. However, to harness the pristine magic of this simple molecule, aerospace engineers must conquer an extraordinary thermodynamic hurdle. Methane does not naturally exist as a liquid on our warm planet. It is a volatile, elusive gas that must be forced into submission by plunging it deep into what physicists call cryogenic temperature. In simple, everyday terms, cryogenic temperature refers to an extreme, mind-numbing deep freeze, a realm of sub-zero cold reaching hundreds of degrees below zero, where ordinary gases lose their airy freedom, freeze their molecular motion, and condense into dense, sluggish liquids. For methane to transform into a liquid fuel, it must be chilled and maintained at a staggering minus 161 degrees Celsius. Managing this level of extreme cold requires a masterclass in thermal insulation. Yet it introduces a hidden, beautiful harmony within the architecture of the Long March 10B. Liquid methane shares a remarkably similar, cozy temperature range with its oxidizer companion, liquid oxygen, because both fluids exist at almost the exact same level of deep cryogenic chill. They can sit side by side inside the rocket tanks, separated by nothing more than a single dish-thin metallic wall. This thermal compatibility eliminates the need for heavy, complex insulation structures, unlike the temperamental, ultra-cold liquid hydrogen used in older rockets, which requires massive, bulky foam blankets to keep its temperamental temperature from freezing everything around it. To guide a towering monument of metal down from the edge of the infinite and place it safely back onto a specific spot on Earth requires an intelligence that functions at the speed of light. This is the domain of the guidance, navigation, and control system, known simply to aerospace masters as the GNC system. In clear, everyday language, the GNC system is the intricate, lightning-fast digital brain and sensory network that continuously tracks exactly where the rocket is, where it needs to go, and how to delicately steer its massive body through the invisible, chaotic currents of the air. Think of it like the master helmsman of an old, grand clipper ship navigating through a dense fog, relying on a flawless inner compass to guide the vessel home safely without a single scratch. When we look at the magnificent Falcon 9, its GNC system has been honed over hundreds of historic flights to perform what once seemed miraculous. As the booster drops through the clouds, it aims for a wide, open target, the flat, spacious deck of an autonomous drone ship floating in the ocean. This wide platform gives the Falcon 9 a comforting margin of safety. Its digital brain must calculate the approach to land within a circle spanning several yards to maintain its balance during this descent. The rocket must constantly fight against aerodynamic torque. In plain, ordinary terms, aerodynamic torque is the twisting, unpredictable rotational force exerted by rushing winds, pushing hard against the long, slender body of the vehicle, trying to spin it out of control like a twig caught in a fast-flowing river. The Falcon 9 overcomes this twisting force by tilting its main engines and using its grid fins to steer itself down onto the flat deck, where its wide landing legs can tolerate a slight offset of a few feet without triggering a disaster. But when we turn our attention to the legless profile of the Long March 10B, we enter a realm of extreme precision that pushes human mathematics to its absolute limit, because this new Eastern Voyager completely rejects the luxury of wide landing legs. It cannot simply aim for a spacious floor. It must slide its body directly into a suspended net, meaning its chocks and hooks must align perfectly with the waiting cables. It is like trying to drop a fine mechanical pocket watch from the top of a grand staircase directly into a tiny velvet pouch held by a swaying hand below. This removes the forgiving margin of safety enjoyed by traditional rockets, shrinking the allowed error from several yards down to mere centimeters. To conquer this ultimate challenge, the digital brain of the Long March 10B relies on an advanced mathematical architecture known as matrix control algorithms, in simple, down-to-earth language. Matrix control algorithms are a highly sophisticated framework of simultaneous equations that allow the computer to analyze hundreds of variables at once, such as speed, orientation, and wind resistance, and translate them into instant, flawless mechanical corrections. To achieve this centimeter-level accuracy while falling at supersonic speeds, the rocket must know its exact coordinates in real time. It utilizes a technology known to geodesists as real-time kinematic positioning. In practical, everyday terms, real-time kinematic positioning is a supercharged satellite navigation technique that uses the phase of the satellite's carrier wave, rather than just the basic signal content, to determine a location with absolute perfection down to the thickness of a single finger. As the Long March 10B approaches the suspended netting system, its sensors read the movement of the floating ship below, adjusting for the swell of the ocean waves and the sudden gusts of wind. The GNC system commands the grid fins to twitch with absolute precision, executing a flawless, micro-controlled path into the waiting web. It is a triumph of pure mind over brute matter, showing how deep human thought can tame the wildest elements of nature. True mastery of the sky is not merely achieved in the blinding flash of liftoff or the breathless theater of landing. It is won in the quiet, methodical world of ground operations, the unheralded labor that occurs after the smoke clears and the giant booster returns to the surface of our Earth. For any reusable transportation system to truly change the world, it must conquer the tedious logistics of recovery and preparation. This brings us to a profound contrast in operational strategy between the Western Pioneer, the Falcon 9, and the new Eastern Challenger, the Long March 10B. It is a comparison of how two different cultures manage the wear and tear of space travel, aiming to shorten the journey from the ocean recovery deck back to the launching pad. When the Falcon 9 completes its magnificent descent out on the ocean, its journey home has only just begun. The towering white cylinder stands exposed on the open deck of its autonomous drone ship, riding the rolling waves for days as the vessel slowly makes its way back to a coastal port. Once it arrives at the dock, a massive harbor crane must lift the multi-ton booster, turning it horizontally so it can be transported to a specialized hangar. It is here that the intensive process of post-flight refurbishment begins, in clear, ordinary language. Post-flight refurbishment is the thorough, deep cleaning, scrubbing, and rigorous structural overhaul required to make a weathered, space-flown machine completely flight-ready again. Because the Falcon 9 relies on kerosene, teams of technicians must manually scrub away the thick layers of black carbon soot coating the base. Furthermore, the 4 massive landing legs must be carefully detached or folded back using heavy mechanical ground equipment, and the internal aluminum honeycomb cores that were permanently crushed to absorb the landing shock must be completely cut out and replaced with fresh components before the vehicle can ever dream of flying again. Contrast this complex harbor ballet with the streamlined, protective workflow designed for the Long March 10B. The very moment the legless booster is caught by the suspended web of the recovery ship, the ship's automated mechanical arms gently tilt the giant cylinder into a horizontal position. Instead of leaving the rocket exposed to the elements during the long journey back to land, the mechanism rolls the booster directly into an integrated, climate-controlled shelter built right onto the deck of the vessel. This immediate shelter shields the delicate titanium skin and intricate valves from marine atmospheric degradation. In simple, down-to-earth terms, marine atmospheric degradation is the destructive, invisible eating away of metals, seals, and electrical wiring caused by constant exposure to salty ocean spray and humid coastal air. By tucking the Long March 10B into a warm, dry garage within minutes of its arrival, the engineers prevent the corrosive salt from ever biting into the machine, preserving its pristine structural integrity during the voyage home. Because the Long March 10B completely rejects landing gear, there are no heavy struts to disassemble, no hydraulic legs to inspect, and no crushed internal metal cores to replace at the port. The vehicle arrives at the shipyard ready for immediate processing, combined with the pristine cleanliness of its methane-powered upper stage, which leaves absolutely zero soot inside the plumbing. The rocket requires almost no manual scrubbing or deep internal flushing. The operational burden is shifted entirely from the flying vehicle to the permanent ground infrastructure. This fundamental difference in design directly dictates the efficiency of the turnaround cycle. In plain, ordinary language, the turnaround cycle is the strict, step-by-step timeline required to inspect, service, refuel, and transport a flown booster back onto the launch pad for its next journey to the stars. For the Falcon 9, this cycle is a magnificent but labor-intensive process that typically spans several weeks, requiring vast armies of technicians and specialized workshops to service the legs and engines. The Long March 10B, by keeping its body simple, smooth, and legless, aims for a significantly compressed timeline. It treats the rocket less like a delicate, weathered artifact that must be carefully rebuilt, and more like a standard commercial airliner that can be sheltered, checked, and returned to service with minimal delay. As the quiet machineries of recovery rest under the starlit sky, we must look upward to understand the true purpose of this frantic innovation. This mastery of weight and fuel is driven by a grander, invisible race to occupy low Earth orbit, the narrow cosmic highway circling just above our atmosphere. Let us now lift our eyes to the silent theater where vast mega-constellations, or interlaced networks of satellites, are quietly dividing the night. To comprehend this hidden competition, we must look beyond what our eyes can see and examine the invisible pathways that allow modern civilization to breathe. When a nation or a company launches a satellite into the heavens, that machine cannot simply drift anywhere it pleases. It must occupy a very precise pocket of space and utilize a highly specific stream of energy to communicate with the surface of the Earth. In the meticulous charts of astrophysicists, this vital invisible resource is known as the radio frequency spectrum. In simple, down-to-earth language, the radio frequency spectrum refers to the invisible lanes of wireless communication airwaves that satellites must use to beam internet data, television signals, and military intelligence back down to Earth without jamming or drowning out each other's signals. Think of it like the old dial on an AM radio in a classic automobile. There are only so many clear stations along the dial. If two broadcasters try to send out their music on the exact same frequency, the result is nothing but loud, irritating static, because these invisible communication lanes are strictly limited by the laws of physics. There is a hard, unyielding limit to how many satellites can operate in the sky simultaneously before the celestial airwaves become completely choked and unusable. Because this invisible real estate is so incredibly precious, the nations of the world long ago established a supreme referee to prevent absolute chaos in the sky. This referee is the International Telecommunication Union, a grand global body that manages the heavens under a strict, unyielding legal principle, the rule of first come, first served, in practical everyday terms. This legal framework means that whichever country manages to physically build a satellite, rocket it into a specific slot in the sky, and turn on its transmitters first, wins the absolute permanent legal right to own that specific orbital pathway and that specific radio frequency for generations to come. It is a modern, high-tech version of the old land rushes that shaped the American West in the 19th century, where pioneers raced their wagons across the open territory to drive their wooden stakes into the soil, claiming the finest plots of land simply because they arrived before anyone else. In this cosmic gold rush, there are no second-place prizes. If a nation waits too long, they will wake up to find that the finest, clearest frequencies in the sky have been legally locked away by foreign powers forever. Among these highly prized orbital paths, none is more fiercely coveted by the great superpowers than what astronomers call a sun-synchronous orbit. In clear, ordinary language, a sun-synchronous orbit is a highly specialized, precise cosmic highway that ensures a satellite passes over any given spot on Earth at the exact same local solar time every single day, bathing the ground below in perfect, consistent sunlight for weather tracking, spy photography, or solar power generation. Imagine a celestial watchtower that glides over a specific city at exactly 10 o'clock every morning, year after year, allowing its cameras to take pictures with the exact same shadow lengths and light angles, making it incredibly easy to spot tiny, hidden changes on the ground. Because this specific highway offers such unparalleled advantages for global intelligence and environmental monitoring, it has become the ultimate prize in the race for orbital dominance. But like a narrow scenic overlook on a mountain road, there are only so many slots along this path before the danger of catastrophic collisions becomes too great. This brings us to the urgent geopolitical reality that unfolded as we entered the mid-20s. For nearly a decade, the Western world, led by the magnificent, unprecedented industrial machine of SpaceX, has been systematically colonizing these prime celestial highways, with thousands of Starlink satellites already floating in perfect interlaced networks around our planet. The American private sector had effectively claimed a near monopoly on the best radio frequencies and the cleanest orbital slots. The leaders in Beijing looked up at this rapidly growing lattice of foreign satellites and realized that if they did not act with immense speed, the iron laws of the international referee would permanently shut them out of the sky. They recognized that they could not afford to manufacture rockets using the slow, disposable methods of the past while their competitor was launching fleets every few days. This desperate shortage of empty space is the true reason why the successful recovery of the Long March 10B on that warm July evening is such a monumental turning point for our world. The rocket is not merely a brilliant toy for scientists. It is a heavy, industrial shovel designed to dig China's own foothold into the limited real estate of the heavens before the window of opportunity slams shut forever. By proving they can recover and rapidly reuse their booster stages, the Chinese aerospace establishment has unlocked the ability to launch their own massive satellite constellations, such as SpaceSail and Guowang, at a speed that can match the furious pace of the West. They are rushing to drive their own stakes into the invisible soil of orbit, ensuring their independent sovereignty over the communications infrastructure of the future. For nearly a decade, the skies were quietly claimed by the sweeping networks of America's private sector. But under the watch of this midsummer night, a massive new formation is rising from the east. The absolute monopoly of Starlink is now meeting a formidable, highly calculated response in the twin networks of SpaceSail and Guowang, setting a grand cosmic chessboard where the pieces are moving with unprecedented speed. To truly appreciate the scale of this celestial chessboard, we must understand the nature of the structures being woven around our planet. We are no longer living in an era where satellites are lonely, solitary instruments drifting through the dark like isolated lighthouses. Today, the world's superpowers are constructing what aerospace architects call a mega constellation. In simple, everyday terms, a mega constellation refers to a massive, highly integrated web of thousands of mass-produced satellites working together as a single, flawless machine that blankets the entire globe, ensuring that no matter where you stand on Earth, there is always an invisible eye or an active data signal passing directly overhead. Think of it like a magnificent, automated weaving loom of the 20th century, spinning thousands of fine silver threads simultaneously to create a single, seamless fabric that completely wraps around the planet. Until very recently, SpaceX was the only entity with the keys to this global loom, but the arrival of China's new networks has forever altered the pattern of the weave. The Chinese strategy is defined by a breathtaking duality. deploying two distinct sister networks to establish their presence in the high frontier. The first of these is SpaceSail, a massive commercial enterprise designed to carry high-speed internet and digital infrastructure to every corner of the developing world. The second is Guoang, a sovereign state-backed network engineered to guarantee absolute national security and communications independence for the nation. Together, the blueprints for these twin networks demand the deployment of nearly 30,000 satellites into the close highways of orbit, with SpaceSail aiming for 15,000 individual nodes and Guoang filling out the remainder with over 13,000 spacecraft. It is an industrial campaign of a scale that would have seemed like pure science fiction during the days of our youth, requiring factories to turn out satellites not like delicate, handcrafted chronometers, but like automobiles rolling off a highly automated assembly line. Yet, a factory can produce thousands of satellites, but those machines remain completely useless if they are stranded on the ground, waiting for a lift into the sky. This historic logistical bottleneck is precisely why the successful flight of the Long March 10B is the vital pivot point upon which this entire global balance turns. To launch 30,000 satellites before international deadlines expire, you cannot rely on old, single-use rockets that must be built from scratch for every handful of cargo. You need a massive, reusable workhorse capable of carrying enormous weight on every single journey. The Long March 10B provides exactly that, boasting a magnificent lifting capacity of over 16 tons to the lower celestial highways. This immense strength allows the Chinese launch teams to master a highly sophisticated technique known as payload integration. In plain, ordinary language, payload integration is the delicate mechanical art of packing, stacking, and folding dozens of flat-panel satellites tightly together inside the nose cone of a rocket, ensuring they can survive the violent vibrations of liftoff and then deploy smoothly into space one by one without ever tangling or colliding with each other. It is very much like packing a beautifully crafted set of nesting boxes into a single traveling trunk, maximizing every square inch of available space so that a single voyage can populate an entire region of the sky. By utilizing the 16-ton capacity of the Long March 10B, China can now launch up to 50 satellites in a single, thunderous burst, clearing the logjam of production and matching the frantic deployment pace of the West. As these thousands of new satellites enter the quiet night, they must find their place within a highly complex, predetermined grid, moving in perfect harmony with the thousands of Starlink nodes already tracing their paths across the dark. To prevent this crowded sky from collapsing into a chaotic sea of metal collisions, the automated brains of these machines must maintain what orbital mechanics call orbital resonance. In clear, down-to-earth language, orbital resonance is the carefully timed, synchronized rhythm where different satellites pass through the exact same regions of space at different intervals, moving past one another like two perfectly timed passenger trains crossing a narrow bridge on opposite schedules without ever touching. It is a grand, silent dance conducted by supercomputers, ensuring that as the networks of the East and West cross paths in the great night, they do so with a flawless mathematical civility. For men of our generation who lived through the tense standoffs of the 20th century, true security was always defined by clear physical borders drawn upon a map. We remember when a nation's sovereignty was protected by the heavy steel of naval fleets or watchful eyes of soldiers stationed along the frontiers. But beneath the quiet watch of this night, the nature of power has undergone an invisible transformation. The ultimate shield of a nation is no longer made of concrete or iron. It is woven from invisible strands of data moving through the vacuum of space. The sudden historic success of the Long March 10B is a vital act of survival in an era where failing to control your own digital skies means surrendering your independence to a foreign hand. This urgent realization was forged in the bitter, real-world lessons of recent regional conflicts, events that sent a profound shockwave through the defense ministries of every superpower. We watched from our living rooms as the traditional rules of engagement were completely rewritten by a sprawling network of private commercial satellites floating peacefully in the dark. In those intense moments, a single private constellation became the absolute backbone of an entire theater of conflict, directing unmanned aircraft and maintaining vital communications when all ground networks had been destroyed. But with that immense power came a terrifying revelation. The ability of an entire country to defend itself suddenly depended entirely on the personal whim or corporate permission of a single foreign billionaire who held the power to turn the signal off with the flick of a digital switch. This historic bottleneck forced global leaders to confront a new imperative known to geopolitical architects as orbital sovereignty. In clear, everyday language, orbital sovereignty refers to the absolute, independent right of a nation to command its own digital skies, secure its own communication pathways, and protect its national data infrastructure without ever having to beg for permission from a foreign corporation or a rival government. It is the modern extension of the classic freedom of the seas that we grew up respecting. Without orbital sovereignty, a nation's entire digital economy, its power grids, and its defense systems are left floating on a fragile foundation, vulnerable to being instantly paralyzed by a distant actor who controls the orbital gates. The urgency of this vulnerability became even more pronounced with the arrival of projects like Starshield, a highly classified, military-focused evolution of commercial satellite networks designed specifically for government intelligence and secure tactical communications. The leaders in Beijing looked up at this rapidly solidifying celestial shield and understood a harsh truth: they could not afford to let the monopoly of the West go unanswered. If they left the heavens entirely in the hands of a single foreign entity, their own national security would be reduced to a state of permanent asymmetry. They recognized that they needed to build their own independent shield, a fortress of code and metal that could withstand any external pressure. To achieve this absolute security, China's strategic planners designed what defense scientists call a decentralized space infrastructure. In simple, down-to-earth terms, a decentralized space infrastructure is the sophisticated practice of scattering vital communication networks across thousands of small, interconnected satellites drifting in perfect harmony, rather than relying on a few massive ground stations or giant, lonely satellites that can be easily targeted or destroyed. Think of it like a magnificent chainmail armor shirt worn by a medieval knight. If a single metal link is struck and shattered by an arrow, the rest of the interconnected mesh absorbs the impact, remaining perfectly intact to protect the wearer. By spreading their national communication nodes across a vast web of 15,000 individual SpaceSail and Guoang satellites, the Chinese establishment ensures that their network is completely immune to a single catastrophic strike. creating an unbreakable digital canopy over their territory. This grand defensive tapestry is the true hidden meaning behind the flawless recovery of the Long March 10B on that warm July evening. The ability to rapidly recover, refuel, and launch these rockets again and again is the iron hammer that allows China to forge its decentralized space infrastructure with absolute certainty. It removes the fear of being left behind in the dark, ensuring they can populate their defensive grids faster than any adversary can attempt to deny them access to the frontier. The legless white booster resting in its netting cradle is a quiet declaration of independence, a promise that the digital future of the East will be secured by its own sky. Yet, this crowded highway of low Earth orbit is merely the first stepping stone. Beyond this silver mesh of satellites lies an ancient prize that captured our childhood imaginations: the pale, comforting glow of the moon. Let us now lift our eyes higher into the velvet night, where the technology of the Long March 10B is quietly forging the path for a grand, new geopolitical race to the lunar South Pole. And the successful recovery of the Long March 10B out on the open ocean is not merely an achievement for local satellite networks, it is the vital hidden key that unlocks an ambitious journey to the lunar surface before this decade draws to a close in 2030. To understand this deep connection, we must look closely at the subtle nomenclature of this new Voyager, specifically the solitary letter B attached to its name in the grand design of the Eastern Space Program. The Long March 10B is not an isolated project. It is the direct, scale model precursor to a colossus. The vehicle we watched slide gracefully into the suspended netting system is a flying laboratory, engineered to test the exact systems that will soon power a towering super-heavy rocket designed for deep space. In the precise language of structural engineering, this testing focuses heavily on what is known as the core stage configuration. In plain, everyday terms, the core stage configuration refers to the massive, load-bearing central cylinder of the rocket that serves as its main structural spine. The heavy-duty trunk, where the most powerful engines are clustered together in perfect harmony to lift the immense weight of the entire vehicle off the launch pad. By launching and successfully recovering this single central core on Earth, engineers are gathering invaluable real-world data on how this structural spine handles the immense, crushing forces of flight, ensuring that the grander version will be flawless when it carries human lives toward the silver horizon. This engineering lineage becomes clear when we look at the propulsion system shared between these two sister ships. The 7 YF-100K engines that shook the tropical beaches of Hainan Island are the exact same mechanical hearts that will beat at the base of the moon rocket. By flying these engines repeatedly on the Long March 10B, technicians are mastering the subtle arts of deep throttling and automated reignition. This mastery is critical for optimizing a vital aerodynamic metric known to rocket designers as the thrust-to-weight ratio. In simple, down-to-earth language, the thrust-to-weight ratio is the measure of raw engine muscle compared to the heavy burden of the metallic structure itself, a crucial balance indicating how easily a rocket can break the chains of gravity and how gently it can throttle down its power to hover like a hummingbird before touching down. By tuning this delicate ratio in the safe arena of Earth's orbit. The GNC computers are learning exactly how to balance a giant machine on a single sheer, controlled needle of fire, a skill that will be desperately needed when a heavy lunar lander descends through the absolute silence of the moon's airless valleys. The ultimate manifestation of this hidden connection will be realized when the full, three-core variant of the Long March 10 is finally rolled out onto the pad for its historic voyage. Unlike the single-cylinder profile of the 10B, the true moon-bound super rocket will feature 3 of these massive core stages strapped side by side, creating a mountain of metal producing over 2,000 tons of thunderous lift. It is a design philosophy that mirrors the grand machinery of our youth, evoking the raw power of the Saturn V, but enhanced with the sophisticated digital precision of the 21st century. The data gathered during that brief, 6-minute flight we analyzed earlier is the precise foundation upon which this giant will stand, ensuring that its multiple cores can separate smoothly at the edge of space and return home without a single structural failure. Let us sit quietly for a moment and reflect on the absolute grandeur of the Apollo era that shaped our youth. The mighty Saturn V was a monument to singular, brute force, a solitary colossus that carried the entire weight of human ambition on its shoulders in a single, thundering launch. But as we look toward the modern race for the lunar South Pole, the architecture of exploration has fundamentally shifted. Instead of relying on a single, impossibly massive booster, the Chinese aerospace program has chosen a path of elegant choreography, the dual-launch strategy. This operational shift replaces the brutal, all-or-nothing philosophy of the past with a sophisticated, synchronized ballet. By splitting the immense weight of a manned lunar mission into 2 separate vehicles, humanity is learning to cross the deep void not with raw weight, but with mathematical precision and tactical patience. The dual-launch strategy breaks the immense burden of a lunar voyage into 2 distinct, manageable halves. Instead of risking an entire crew and their survival hardware on one giant roll of the dice, 2 separate Long March 10 super heavy rockets will leap into the heavens from the coastal launch pads of Hainan within a brief window of one another. The cosmic split, this dual booster approach drastically reduces the required size and lifting capacity of a single rocket, utilizing the structural lessons perfected by the Long March 10B to achieve unprecedented reliability. To visualize how this grand campaign unfolds, let us examine the 2 distinct components that will meet in the deep dark of space. The crew transport vessel Mengzhou, translated as the Vessel of Dreams. This spacecraft is dedicated entirely to keeping the brave pioneers safe, warm, and breathing during their long transit across the 300,000-mile gulf separating Earth from the Moon. The lunar lander Lanyu, meaning embracing the Moon. This specialized vehicle carries the heavy descent engines, landing legs, and scientific gear required to touch down safely within the treacherous shadowed craters of the lunar South Pole. Once both vessels break free from Earth's gravity well, they will travel along parallel pathways through the silent vacuum, charting a course toward our ancient celestial companion. They will not meet in the crowded highways of low Earth orbit. Instead, their grand rendezvous will take place in the quiet, weightless solitude of lunar orbit. This choice of rendezvous location is a masterclass in efficiency. by docking the two vehicles directly in the Moon's gravitational neighborhood. The system avoids dragging the dead weight of the landing gear and descent fuel through the long journey from Earth. The two spacecraft will slide together with absolute digital precision, locking their docking mechanisms with a gentle mechanical click. The astronauts will then float through the internal hatch from the comfort of the capsule into the cockpit of the lander, preparing themselves for the final, breathless descent to the dusty gray surface below. This double booster approach is not a distant, abstract dream for the next generation. It is a concrete, active campaign anchored firmly before the year 2030. The successful ocean recovery of the Long March 10B that we witnessed on that warm July evening serves as the vital, real-world foundation for this entire timeline. By mastering the art of reusable components and efficient ground logistics today, the program is clearing the structural bottlenecks that have historically slowed deep space exploration down to a crawl. The roadmap toward the final landing is divided into a series of disciplined, progressive milestones designed to eliminate risk at every turn. Unmanned system validation, sending empty variants of both the capsule and the lander into lunar orbit to test the automated docking sequences and matrix control algorithms under the harsh radiation of deep space. High-altitude reignition trials, perfecting the deep throttling capabilities of the liquid methane and kerosene engines, ensuring they can execute the precise braking maneuvers needed to conquer the lack of a lunar atmosphere. The manned leap. Launching. The twin, Long March 10 boosters in perfect synchronization, sending the first crew to walk among the untouched peaks of the lunar South Pole. Why are the world's great powers rushing toward this specific, rugged region of the lunar surface with such fierce determination? The answer lies within the permanently shadowed craters of the lunar South Pole, where the temperature drops to a mind-numbing deep freeze that has remained untouched for billions of years. Within these dark sanctuaries lies a priceless treasure, vast deposits of water ice. For a civilization looking to establish a permanent foothold among the stars, water ice is far more valuable than gold. It can be mined, melted, and broken down into its basic atomic components, hydrogen and oxygen, to create fresh breathing air and highly potent rocket fuel. Whoever conquers the logistics of the dual launch strategy first will win the absolute historical right to establish their fortresses around these celestial water wells, claiming the ultimate strategic high ground for the next century of human commerce. The first great faction on this celestial board is the Artemis Alliance, a magnificent diplomatic and industrial coalition led by Washington and backed by more than 40 nations, including our traditional transatlantic allies in Europe, Japan, and Canada, rooted in the philosophical traditions of the Western world. The Artemis Accords seek to establish a rules-based order for the commercial age of space exploration. However, beneath the inspiring language of international cooperation lies a highly pragmatic, defensive mechanism designed to protect Western interests. The central pillar of the Artemis framework introduces a concept known to legal scholars as safety zones. The concept of safety zones. In plain, everyday terms, a safety zone is a legally declared perimeter surrounding a nation's lunar habitat or mining operation. Within this boundary, foreign competitors are restricted from entering or operating without explicit permission, ostensibly to prevent harmful technical interference or physical collisions. To the strategists in the West, these zones are an essential tool to guarantee order and security for private corporations investing billions of dollars to harvest lunar resources. But to the empires of the East, this looks like a modern reimagining of the old British enclosure, acts a clever legal maneuver to colonize the finest plots of land before anyone else can plant their flag. Refusing to accept a celestial order dictated entirely by Western legal interpretations, Beijing and Moscow joined hands to forge a formidable counterweight, the International Lunar Research Station, commonly referred to as the ILRS. This coalition represents a completely different geopolitical paradigm, drawing in a diverse array of partners across the global south who feel excluded from the traditional Western space establishment. The ILRS explicitly rejects the Artemis Accords, viewing the concept of safety zones as a unilateral American attempt to violate the sacred Outer Space Treaty of 1967, which states that no nation can claim sovereign ownership over celestial territory. Instead, the Sino-Russian alliance proposes an open, distributed infrastructure network. They envision a sprawling collective of automated rovers, nuclear power hubs, and scientific outposts operating under a shared command structure. By positioning themselves as the defenders of open access to the cosmos, they are actively challenging the maritime legal traditions of the West, setting the stage for a profound ideological clash over who truly dictates the rules of human commerce among the stars. This grand ideological division is not a mere academic debate between lawyers in Washington and Beijing. It is a fierce, physical competition driven by the extreme scarcity of lunar geography. As we have noted, the entire geopolitical value of the Moon is concentrated within a few dozen square miles along the rugged ridges of the South Pole. This creates a terrifyingly narrow bottleneck, where the two competing blocks must operate in dangerous proximity to one another. Imagine two rival logging outfits trying to harvest the same tiny grove of ancient trees on a steep mountain peak. Or two competitive cattle baronies trying to draw water from the solitary, shallow well in the middle of a vast, parched desert. The primary flashpoint for this upcoming friction rests upon the peaks of eternal light, those rare, high-altitude crater rims that receive near-constant sunlight, offering an inexhaustible supply of solar energy to power the complex life support systems below. If the Artemis Alliance declares a safety zone around the premier solar ridge of Shackleton Crater, they effectively deny the ILRS the ability to place their own solar collectors in that region. Conversely, if the state-backed heavy machinery of the ILRS occupies the narrow paths leading down into the ice-rich craters, Western commercial mining entities will find themselves physically cut off from the very water wells they need to survive. What we are witnessing beneath the quiet watch of this night is the birth of permanent spheres of influence in the heavens, a celestial mirror of the geopolitical balancing acts that defined the 20th century. The successful recovery of the Long March 10B ensures that the Eastern Coalition possesses the independent logistical muscle to match the West stride for stride, ensuring that neither side can claim an absolute monopoly over the future. The successful journey of the Long March 10B and the grand cosmic chess match it has accelerated marks the definitive end of an old chapter. We are leaving behind the era where space was treated as an exotic, hostile wilderness reserved only for high-stakes geopolitical theater and temporary footprints. We are stepping firmly over the threshold of a new epoch, a time when the great void above our atmosphere ceases to be a distant ceiling and truly becomes our second home. When we were young men, the journey into the heavens was a romantic, solitary leap into the unknown, driven by the raw courage of a handful of pioneers. Today, that romance has matured into something far more enduring, a permanent, global industrial infrastructure. Space is no longer merely a destination we visit. It is an active, vital extension of human geography, a high-altitude arena where the future of our global economy, our digital sovereignty, and our long-term survival is actively being forged. The frantic construction of mega-constellations like Starlink, SpaceSail, and Guoang is effectively weaving a permanent digital canopy around our planet. This silver lattice of satellites ensures that humanity will never again be disconnected, bringing advanced intelligence, weather precision, and secure communications to the most remote corners of our world. By transforming the transport of cargo into orbit into a routine, reusable operation, we have broken the heavy chains that kept our civilization tethered to a single, vulnerable planet. While the intense rivalries between the Artemis Alliance and the International Lunar Research Station may seem like a cause for geopolitical anxiety, those of us who lived through the tense balance of the 20th century know better. We understand that grand competition is the ultimate crucible of human excellence, the very engine that prevents stagnation and forces us to sharpen our intellects. The presence of peer superpowers in orbit ensures that no single entity can ever claim an absolute monopoly over the cosmic highways or the invaluable resources of the lunar South Pole. This relentless balancing act drives both East and West to build more efficient engines, lighter structures, and more precise navigation brains, lifting the entire species higher into the dark. Though we march toward the stars under different flags, we are ultimately building the same grand ladders, paving the way for a multipolar civilization that is resilient, robust, and built to endure for centuries to come. Ultimately, this grand journey back to the moon and out into the vast, silent ocean of the universe is a testament to the unyielding spirit of our species. We are an exploring race, driven by a quiet, generational desire to see what lies beyond the next ridge, to build legacies that outlast our own brief years, and to ensure that the children of tomorrow have a wider, more beautiful sky to look up to. Let the heavy calculations of engineering, the intense strategies of superpowers, and the thunderous echoes of the launch pads fade quietly into the background of your mind. The great machines are now resting safely in their cradles. The thousands of silver satellites are gliding smoothly along their resonant pathways in the dark, and the ancient moon continues its serene, unhurried watch over our blue planet. The long day is done. The celestial borders are at total peace, and the vast, timeless harmony of the cosmos invites you to release the remaining weight of the world, closing your eyes and sinking softly into a deep, untroubled, and beautifully serene sleep.